So, imagine this. What if a complete stranger just approached you on the street and they handed you this beautifully wrapped, wildly expensive gift, and they asked for absolutely nothing in return?
Oh, man. I think I would instantly panic.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, would you accept it gracefully, or would your internal danger alarms immediately start blaring? I mean, if you are anything like most of us living in the modern world, you'd probably assume it was a scam.
Or a trap. Or, like one of those weird pranks for social media where someone is filming you from a bush.
Exactly. A total setup. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm so glad you're here with us today on the Mind Master channel. And if you haven't already, take a second to subscribe so you never miss one of our deep dives into the mechanics of the human mind.
You've got a really incredible one today.
We really do. So
Okay.
pour yourself a glass of wine. I've got a great red right here, just settling into the lounge for our Mind Master book club. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the psychological architecture of a novel by Allen Levi called Theo of Golden.
Such a brilliant, brilliant book.
It really is. And on its surface, it sounds like this quiet, folksy story about a charming old man in a small southern town. But we are going to walk through this masterpiece chapter by chapter. We're examining the core concepts, the breathtaking quotes, and the hidden wisdom embedded in Theo's journey.
Right, because it is so much more than just a sweet story. Levi uses this seemingly simple narrative as like a Trojan horse. He's delivering a really rigorous examination of how modern society pathologizes grief and really commodifies human connection.
Yeah, the emotional weight of this book is just staggering, and the protagonist, Theo, acts as this fascinating psychological mirror. He's an 86-year-old man who arrives in this small southern town with no last name, a mysterious past, and just literally a pocket full of cash.
It's the ultimate psychological puzzle.
It totally is. So let's jump right in, starting right from the prologue and moving into chapters 1 and 2. We get this detailed look at Theo's arrival in Golden. He is charming, yes, but he is hyper-observant. He takes these meticulously slow walks, inspecting the town with a literal jeweler's loop. And I have to be honest, if a guy like this showed up in my neighborhood, stalking around and staring at people through a magnifying glass, I wouldn't find it charming at all.
No, you'd call the police.
Literally,
Yeah.
I'd find it incredibly creepy. So why are we and the town disarmed by him?
Well, that tension is exactly what makes the opening so effective. You are right to identify that sort of stranger danger instinct. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, our brains are hardwired to view the unknown as a threat.
Especially an unknown with obvious resources and this intense, laser-like focus.
Exactly. We constantly scan for anomalies to keep ourselves safe. But Theo bypasses this threat detection system through his specific physical and emotional cadence.
Oh, I love that. His cadence.
Yeah, he operates with an extreme, almost radical gentleness. He doesn't demand space. He simply occupies it with absolute presence. And that completely short-circuits the town's defensive mechanism.
Because we expect power to be loud.
Right.
Or demanding.
Right. But Theo's power is entirely rooted in his stillness. It disarms the usual social defenses.
And that stillness finds a perfect anchor in this local coffee shop called The Chalice. It's owned by a couple named Shep and Addie. And Levi paints this amazing sensory haven, roasted Ethiopian beans, fresh bread.
You can practically smell it reading the book.
You really can. But Theo isn't even there for the coffee. He is immediately captivated by the walls, which are covered in 92 pencil portraits. They're drawn by a local artist named Asher Glisson.
They're stunning portraits.
Stunning, and yet they're priced astonishingly low, like $125 to $200, and none of them are selling. Theo is just transfixed by them. But it's not just an aesthetic appreciation for him, is it?
Not at all. And this introduces a core theme of the narrative, which is the profound difference between merely looking and actually seeing.
Let's unpack that a bit.
So, Asher's art possesses this rare quality of aliveness. Levi writes that the portraits make you believe the subjects are actually spectators in the coffee shop, rather than just adornments on the wall.
Yeah, it turns the coffee shop into this gallery of human souls.
Exactly. Asher has inadvertently captured the raw, unfiltered essence of these local patrons. So when Theo looks at these portraits, he isn't evaluating the shading or the composition. He doesn't care about the technique.
Right.
He is analyzing the psychological weight carried by the subjects. He sees their buried grief, their hidden pride, their unspoken traumas.
He really sees the human condition perfectly preserved in graphite, which is just beautiful. And this brings us right into chapters 3 to 7 and Theo's bizarre but really beautiful idea.
The first bestowal.
Yes. Theo decides he is going to buy these portraits, track down the actual subjects, and simply give the art back to them. And he starts with a young woman named Minette Prentice.
Right. He buys her a portrait and finds her address.
And he writes her this exquisite handwritten letter on heavy linen paper, asking to meet her at a local fountain called the Fetter so he can give her this gift.
Which is so suspicious in today's world.
It really is. It's like getting an email from a wealthy prince who wants to give you millions of dollars. Minette is a certified public accountant. Her husband, Derek, is a prosecutor. So they are understandably wary.
If there were ever two professions trained to see the worst in humanity, it's those two.
Exactly. Derek immediately assumes it's a stalker or gang retaliation or a sick prank.
Because it is the ultimate collision between radical altruism and modern cynicism. We live in a deeply transactional society.
Everything has a price.
Everything. There's always a string attached or an angle. Minette and Derek's reaction isn't just paranoia. It is a learned survival mechanism.
Right, especially in Derek's line of work. Unprompted contact from a stranger is almost always the prelude to manipulation or worse.
The very idea that someone would spend money and time simply to offer a gift without expecting a return on investment, it violates the foundational rules of their reality.
It totally does. So they decide to go to the fountain for this encounter at the Fetter, but they treat it like a tactical operation. They observe from a safe distance first.
Chicken for snipers, basically.
Basically. But when they finally see this harmless, impeccably dressed 86-year-old man in a heather green flat cap, the threat level drops enough for Minette to approach.
And this is where the conversation turns into something truly breathtaking.
Yeah, Theo completely disarms her. He touches the glass of the frame and tells her he bought it because she reminded him of a lost love from Spain half a century ago.
Such a romantic, gentle way to open.
And then he tells her he sees strength, bravery, kindness, and sadness in her face. Minette is taken aback and asks, "So you see sadness?" And Theo replies with this amazing quote. He says, "The good sadness, I think, is always trying to tell us something very important."
Wow, that hit hard.
It really does. Like, let's just pause on that. The good sadness.
We have to examine the mechanics of that phrase.
Okay.
Because we exist in a culture that fundamentally pathologizes sadness.
We treat it like an illness?
Exactly.
Right.
The moment we feel sorrow, our instinct, and honestly society's instruction, is to eradicate it. We want to medicate it, optimize it, or just hustle our way out of it with positive affirmations.
Toxic positivity.
Right. Sadness is treated as a software glitch that needs an immediate patch.
It makes me think of the check engine light on a car dashboard.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like when that light comes on, it's annoying, it's stressful, and it usually means something is wrong under the hood. But the light itself isn't the malfunction. The light is a critical mechanism of alert.
Right, it's doing its job.
Exactly. If you just take a hammer and smash the light, you haven't fixed the engine. You've just destroyed your ability to know what the engine actually needs. So Theo is basically telling Minette, your check engine light is on, and that is a perfectly functional, necessary part of being human.
That is brilliant. Theo validates her emotional state as an oracle, like a messenger, rather than a defect. And by doing so, he provides a psychological mirror that is entirely devoid of judgment.
And you see the impact of that immediately. Minette just shatters right there at a public fountain. This highly composed, successful CPA breaks down weeping.
Because she finally feels seen.
Yes. She ends up opening up to this complete stranger about her demanding perfectionist father, Pierce, who, in a great little twist, turns out to be Asher, the artist's brother.
Which is a lovely detail.
It really weaves the town together. She reveals this deep trauma of never feeling like she was enough, despite all her professional achievements. She realizes that her sadness isn't a failure. It's the heavy toll of carrying an impossible burden of expectation her whole life.
The gift wasn't the pencil drawing. The gift was the experience of being truly seen.
Exactly. And now, as we move into chapters 8 through 12, we see how an act of eccentricity becomes a formalized mission. Theo is scaling the mission.
Right, he's taking this to the next level.
He moves into an apartment in Ponder House, and he enlists his landlord, James Ponder, and this intensely skeptical secretary, Mrs. Gidley, to help him track down the addresses of the other 91 subjects.
Which requires serious logistical work.
It really does. Let's explore that dynamic. Ponder and Mrs. Gidley really represent the logical, cynical world being slowly won over by raw, unoptimized generosity.
They absolutely do. They are the gatekeepers. Mrs. Gidley flat out thinks this is ridiculous. But what we witness over the course of the story is the gradual erosion of their cynicism.
It's so fun to watch her soften.
It is. It's a fascinating sociological observation. When people are exposed to sustained, authentic altruism, their initial defensive posturing eventually exhausts itself.
Yeah, you can only hold up a shield for so long when no one is attacking you.
Exactly. And we see that defensive posturing at its absolute peak in chapters 13 to 16 with the bestowal to Kendrick.
Oh, Kendrick, this is such a tense scene. Theo tracks down this young, street-smart guy who works nights cleaning buildings. Theo approaches him and hands him a wrapped package. And Kendrick's reaction is a full-blown fight-or-flight response.
It's deeply defensive.
He steps back, his fists clench, his eyes start darting around, scanning the environment. He flat-out refuses to take the package.
And we have to recognize that Kendrick is exhibiting a textbook trauma response.
Right.
For someone who grew up navigating the streets, taking an unknown package from a stranger isn't just naive, it could be fatal. In that moment, Kendrick's amygdala, the fear center of his brain, is just firing on all cylinders.
He expects a trap.
He is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. His brain is prioritizing immediate physical survival over social politeness.
But then Theo gently peels back the brown paper himself, revealing the portrait. And the moment Kendrick sees it, the hypervigilance just evaporates.
It's instantaneous.
His shoulders drop, his fists unclench. It's as if Theo's unconditional giving literally short-circuits modern cynicism, and Kendrick immediately softens and says he's going to give the drawing to his little girl, Lamisha.
That pivot from defense to immediate generosity is crucial. When a nervous system moves out of survival mode and recognizes safety, the human capacity for connection and empathy comes back online instantly.
He goes from protecting his own life to wanting to enrich his daughter's life in a matter of seconds. But this pattern of giving raises a critical question for the reader, which brings us to chapter 17.
Right. Why is Theo doing this?
Exactly. This shifts the tone to something deeply somber. In chapter 17, we finally learn the origin of the wound. We discover that decades ago, back in France, Theo was a vastly wealthy, busy man.
He was an entrepreneur, constantly working.
Constantly. And his life at home was tragic. His wife was a severe alcoholic, and his career kept him away. His only true light was his beloved 10-year-old daughter, Tita. And then Tita dies.
It's just heartbreaking. The narrative handles this loss with such devastating focus on the psychological aftermath.
He is just consumed by this looping, agonizing question. He asks himself, did I not protect my child?
Just let that heavy grief settle for a moment.
It's unbearable. Why does a grieving parent instinctively turn to self-blame like that, even when a tragedy is clearly outside of their control?
Well, it comes down to the psychology of survivor's guilt and the human brain's desperate evolutionary need for causality and control.
Right.
If a sudden tragedy occurs, the brain faces two interpretations. One, the universe is entirely random, chaotic, and fundamentally unsafe. Or two, the tragedy happened because of a specific failure on the parent's part.
And as agonizing as self-blame is, it's psychologically preferable to absolute chaos.
Precisely. If Theo can convince himself that Tita died because he failed to protect her, then the world still makes a twisted kind of sense. It means if he just does better, he can control outcomes in the future.
Wow.
The illusion of control is often a necessary defense mechanism against the terrifying randomness of existence.
And to escape that mental torture chamber, Theo begins walking. Desperate, aimless walks through the French countryside, day after day. And during one of these walks, he has a spiritual awakening.
Which births this radical generosity we see in Golden.
Right. It is a direct transmutation of his unbearable grief over Tita. And moving into chapters 20 to 22, we see how this philosophy of generosity applies to art.
The visits to Asher Glisson's studio.
Yes. Asher feels like a total failure because his art doesn't sell. He has this incredible talent, but he's drowning in insecurity because the market has deemed his work largely worthless.
Which feels intensely relevant today.
It really does. It's exactly like modern social media. If a project doesn't go viral, or if it doesn't get thousands of likes or sales, we internalize the idea that the creation and the creator is inherently worthless.
We outsource our self-esteem to the algorithm.
Exactly. But Theo completely redefines good art for Asher. He tells him that good art is art that has love in it.
I love that. Theo refuses to let Asher adopt the market's perspective. He tells Asher that his portraits are masterpieces because they help ordinary people confront their own unacknowledged longing.
It gives Asher his dignity back. And speaking of dignity, we have to talk about chapters 23 through 28 and the introduction of Ellen.
Oh, Ellen is such a striking character.
She really is. Ellen is a homeless, mentally ill woman in Golden. She rides around on this bicycle she calls the noble invention. She's fiercely protective, obsessed with proper grammar, and highly volatile.
She shatters the monolithic stereotype we often assign to the unhoused.
Completely. And when Theo apologizes to her during a conversation, she says this incredibly profound thing. She refers to the loss of her child as kidnapping by bureaucracy.
The pain in that statement is staggering.
And Theo's reply is just, wow. He says, every hurt the world has ever known is somehow the fault of every person who ever lived.
That is a stunning way to view humanity. Let's just pause and really unpack the concept of collective emotional responsibility there.
Yeah, because we are so conditioned to believe in rugged individualism.
Right. We think your failures are your own, your poverty is your fault. We build these walls of individual isolation so we don't have to feel responsible for the suffering on the street.
But Theo is proposing a model of systemic empathy.
Exactly. He doesn't pity Ellen. Pity is a distancing emotion. It says, I feel bad for you over there. Instead, Theo claims a fraction of the guilt for her pain simply by being a member of the human race. He meets her intellectual intensity, and he validates her motherhood.
It's so powerful, and as we sip our wine and turn to chapters 29 through 31, we see Theo acting as a mirror for another broken soul. Basil, the street musician.
Basil is a fascinating counterpart to Allen.
He really is. Basil gave up teaching at a low-income school to nurse his dying sister, and now he plays guitar on the street and feels like a total failure. But Theo calls him raw material for a saint.
Basil scoffs at that naturally.
Of course. But Theo tells him heaven can draw a straight line with a crooked stick.
That is such a profound dismantling of perfectionism. We think we have to march in a straight, unbroken line toward success or enlightenment.
But Theo's saying our crookedness, our failures, the times we had to abandon our careers to care for someone, those are the exact bends that allow us to be used for something meaningful.
She shows broken people their own inherent divinity.
Moving on to chapter 32, we enter the ticking clock of the year, and Theo shifts from emotional validation to active intervention.
The Princess of Titlemish.
Yes. Kendrick's daughter, Lamisha, is hit by a car. She ends up in the hospital with a heavy leg brace. Theo visits her and writes and illustrates a custom book for her about a girl with blue shoes.
Here, Theo is actively reparenting the world,
Pouring the love he couldn't give Tita into Lamisha.
It is a beautiful demonstration of how unresolved trauma can be transmuted into radical, healing devotion.
And we see another form of healing in chapters 34 through 39 with Catherine Lesker. She's a successful journalist who still sees herself as a poor, shamed girl in a trailer park.
Right, she has identity lock. Her internal narrative is frozen at the sight of her deepest shame.
So Theo performs this literal mime. He mimes pulling the bad memory from her head and putting it in his pocket, trading it for the beautiful portrait.
The psychological power of somatic, physical rituals and releasing deeply held shame is huge here. The nervous system speaks the language of physical action, not logic.
It's so whimsical but effective. But this radical kindness does invite danger, doesn't it? Theo is physically threatened by Cleve Torber, a jealous boyfriend. It makes you ask, does radical kindness require inviting danger?
That is the inescapable risk of vulnerability. You cannot engage the world unconditionally without eventually colliding with unhealed hostility.
And now, arriving at chapter 45, this is perhaps the most intense psychological breakthrough. Tony's birthday.
The vintage trauma.
Yes. Tony is the town cynic. Theo invites him over and opens a 1947 vintage port from the very vineyard Theo worked at as a 15-year-old boy in Portugal.
The sensory details here are incredible.
Theo delivers this quote: "The roots can only grow in stony, difficult ground. The pruner's shears cut deep for the sake of the sweetness, for this very moment."
Wow, let that sit on your palate.
Tony just breaks down weeping. He shares his trauma from Vietnam and the death of his friend Bobo.
Theo uses literal wine to unlock the stony ground of PTSD. By offering this incredibly rare wine from his own past, Theo provides a safe container for Tony's buried pain.
Let's pour one last glass as we move into the final act, chapters 46 through 56, the passage of time. Theo goes to New York for Christmas, but sends highly personalized gifts back to Golden.
Like a box of feathers for Ellen.
Yes. He returns and celebrates his one-year anniversary in Golden. He is so happy, he says, "I have tasted heaven."
He has found absolute peace.
Then, in chapters 57 to 59, everything changes. Late at night, Theo hears a commotion. He goes down to the median to protect Ellen from attackers trying to steal her bike, and he is brutally murdered. Simone the cellist finds his body.
The suddenness of the violence is incredibly jarring.
I was in genuine shock. I felt heartbroken. The suddenness of violence interrupting a year of curated beauty, it feels almost cynical.
I understand that reaction.
Yeah.
But psychologically, Levi refuses to offer a fairy tale sanitization of the world. Radical altruism doesn't create a magical force field.
And then, 3 days later, the revelation hits. The New York Times reveals who Theo really was.
This changes everything.
Gemas Theophilus Zilavez. Zila, one of the most famous, wealthy artists and collectors in the world. His final masterpiece was a canvas series called The Blues of Golden.
Featuring Ellen's hat, Luisha's shoes, and Baba's pill bottle.
It completely recontextualizes the entire book. He wasn't just a sweet old man, he was a titan of the art world who chose to spend his final year looking at other people's unseen art.
Asher's portraits.
Right, and elevating the broken pieces of ordinary lives into literal museum masterpieces.
Moving to chapter 60, the town mourns. Father Lundy gives a staggering eulogy.
He says, "To everyone else, he was Zila the famous. To us, he was Theo the familiar. To some, he was Zila the mysterious recluse. To us, he will always be the face of heaven."
That dichotomy highlights the deep human tension between legacy and intimacy. Theo chose intimacy over legacy. He stepped down from international fame to sit on a park bench and look an unhoused woman in the eye.
Finally, chapter 61. Mr. Ponder delivers a box to Asher. Inside is a letter from Theo, and we get the ultimate breathtaking twist. Theo had a brief affair with Asher's mother decades ago. Theo is Asher's biological father.
It is a staggering revelation.
He writes, "I never replied to her letter. I did, of course, reply to yours. I have often wondered, why did she write to me at all? But I am forever grateful that her letter, the very few words she sent me, brought me as an old man to Golden to spend part of my final years with you."
We have to break down the profound response of Theo here. He spent a whole year sitting across from his own son, buying his son's art, encouraging him, yet never burdened him with the disruptive truth while he was alive.
You just wanted to watch him shine.
Exactly. Revealing it would have been about Theo's ego. He absorbed the pain of remaining anonymous so Asher could be valued by a stranger. It is egoless love.
Theo of Golden teaches us that the greatest masterpiece we can ever create is how we choose to see other people. Every person carrying good sadness is just raw material for a saint.
It's an inspiring summary of an incredible journey.
Thank you so much for hanging out, sipping wine, and exploring the depths of the human heart with us at the Mind Master Book Club.
It's been a pleasure.
Please subscribe to the channel and comment below with your thoughts. Whose portrait are you failing to see in your own life?
A great question.
And I'll leave you with this final, lingering thought to mull over long after the deep dive ends. What if the seemingly random strangers who annoy us, delay us, or confuse us are actually the exact people sent to help us finish our own masterpiece? Catch you next time.